Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Church of Grace. My name is Patrick Hayes, and tonight is Friday, March 28th, and we are in part 9 of our study of the end times. Tonight we will continue in the book of Revelation, and we will finish our study of the book of Revelation. We are in the book of Revelation to show you what will happen during the 70th week of Daniel. We are not trying to do an in-depth study of the book of Revelation. Now, if you haven't been here in a bit, if this is your first time, if you are not up on the book of Revelation, you haven't read it in a little while, there's going to be a lot of information thrown at you tonight. Just buckle up and do your best to stay with us. But forgive me, it's going to be a lot. By way of review, the 70th week of Daniel is a 7-year period that the prophet Daniel talks about in the book of Daniel, chapter 9. In Matthew 24, Jesus tells us in the Olivet Discourse that it is the key to end times prophecy. We have a 7-year period that is broken down into 2 3.5-year periods. Those 3.5-year periods are also described as 42 months, and they're described as 1,260 days. This 7-year period that we call the 70th week of Daniel is the most documented period of time in Earth's history. And it was all written about before it happened. We're still waiting for this 7-year period. Many things happen in the first 3.5 years, which we will discuss. However, most of the action takes place in the second 3.5 years. That is the time that we call the Great Tribulation. That was coined by Matthew. It was not coined by Matthew. It was coined by Jesus. Matthew wrote it down in Matthew chapter 24, verse 21. All 7 years of the 70th week of Daniel are described in Revelation chapters 6 through 19. And that's what we're focusing on this evening. Last week, we finished up chapters 8 and 9. So here is the layout for the Great Tribulation in the book of Revelation. The judgment of God is poured out in 3 stages. There is a scroll with 7 seals, and each seal that is opened up is a different judgment of God. Then, after the 7 sealed scroll, comes 7 trumpet judgments. These 7 trumpet judgments are described in Revelation chapters 8 and 9. In between trumpet judgment number 6 and trumpet judgment number 7 is a parenthetical insert, which is Revelation chapters 10 through 14. Then the 7th trumpet judgment ends up being the final 7 judgments, which are 7 vials of wrath, sometimes called 7 bowls of wrath. And the format is the same. We get 6 vials of judgment, and then there is another parenthetical insert, and then the 7th one. This is the outline of the book of Revelation when describing the 70th week of Daniel and the judgment that God is pouring out on the world. Last week we finished up trumpet judgment number 6, and now we are getting into the parenthetical insert, which is chapters 10 through 14. That's all by way of introduction. Any questions? Okay. Chapters 10 through 14 all summarize different events. Chapter 10 is the mighty angel with a book. Chapter 11 is the 2 witnesses. Chapter 12 is a summary of the nation of Israel. Chapter 13 are the 2 beasts, the beast of the earth and the beast of the sea. We know them as the Antichrist and the false prophet. Chapter 14 is the harvest. Excuse me. There are several chapters that we're just barely going to touch on. For instance, chapter 10, we are skipping chapter 10 in its entirety. It's only 11 verses long. You can read it on your own. In chapter 11, we know that the temple is standing at this point in Jerusalem, because in verse 1 of chapter 11, the Apostle John is told to go and measure it. In verse 3 of chapter 11, we read about two witnesses. We are given a lot of information about these two witnesses, so we're going to jump in and look at this. Point number 1, there are two of them. These two witnesses possess supernatural powers given to them by God for this time. These two witnesses prophesy for 3.5 years. Obviously, that is a significant amount of time. It is 1/2 of the 7-year period. The two witnesses are on earth in the first 3.5 years of the 7-year period. We will see that during the time period when the two witnesses are active, people are getting saved. The people on the earth are mad at the two witnesses, and they are mad at God. When threatened, these two witnesses can breathe fire out of their mouth to kill their enemies. They can stop the rain, just like Elijah did. They can turn water into blood, just like Moses did. And they can bring plagues to the earth. Kids, who are these two witnesses? Go ahead. It's okay. Anyone want to guess? All right, we'll go through it now. In 1 Kings 17:1, and Elijah the Tishbite, who was of the inhabitants of Gilead, said unto Ahab, As the Lord God of Israel liveth, before whom I stand, there shall not be dew nor rain these years, but according to my word. Elijah is the prophet that famously stopped the rains. Moses turns water into blood and brings plagues back in the days of the Exodus. Moses and Elijah are the two prophets who performed the great miracles of God in the Bible. And they are the two prophets that God chose to send to the Mount of Transfiguration to visit with Jesus. I believe they will be the two prophets God uses in the last days. Many people smarter than me will disagree, and they'll argue that these two characters are someone else. It's up to you to read the Bible and do your own homework and make your decision. You know where I stand on it. I believe it's Moses and Elijah. With these two fellas, they will ultimately be killed by the beast. We read in Revelation chapter 11, verse 7, And when they shall have finished their testimony, the beast that ascendeth out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them, and shall overcome them and kill them. The two witnesses are ultimately killed by the beast. You got a question? That's a great segue into my next statement. Verse 7 is the first mention of the Antichrist in the book of Revelation. He is called the beast of the earth. There is also a beast of the sea, and we're going to get to him in a couple chapters. It seems that they, the two witnesses, are untouchable until they are finished with their ministry. And it is only when they are finished with their ministry that they are able to be overcome and killed. I was going to say defeated. They're really not defeated by the Antichrist. If we continue on into verse 8. And their dead bodies shall lie in the street of the great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. What city are we talking about? Very good, Greg. Paxton gets a point. Oh, yeah, absolutely. You're lucky. Jerusalem. Do you know there are only two cities that we care about in the Bible? Genesis to Revelation, there's two. There's lots of cities mentioned, obviously. What are the two famous cities in the Bible? One is Jerusalem. What's the other one? Nope. That's a good one. Very important. Jesus was born there. King David was born there. Means house of bread. What was the other city that's important in the Bible, Grace? Nope. Israel's the country. Jerusalem's the capital. Adults? Nope. Babylon. Babylon is the other major city found in the Bible. The war between good and evil is represented by those two cities. Babylon is in the book of Genesis. It was one of the first cities ever made by Nimrod back in the book of Genesis, right after the flood. Babylon shows up again in the book of Revelation. All right, let's see where we are. Okay, the bodies of these prophets lie in the street for 3.5 days. They are not buried. Not burying a body is a way of desecrating that body. It is an insult to that person and to their friends and family. Continuing on, Revelation chapter 11, verses 10, 11, and 12. And they that dwell upon the earth shall rejoice over them and make merry, and shall send gifts one to another, because these two prophets tormented them that dwell on the earth. Do you know that in the entire book of Revelation, the world, meaning the non-saved people, which the book of Revelation often calls the men of the earth, the men of the earth celebrate one time. In the entire book of Revelation, they celebrate one time. It is when the two prophets are killed by the Antichrist and their bodies are left in the street. Not only does the world celebrate, it says they make merry and send gifts to one another. That sounds like they just invented a new holiday. Shh. Just stop it. It seems that the men of the earth believed they had defeated God and his soldiers. Continuing on, and after 3 days and a half, the Spirit of life from God entered into them, and they stood upon their feet, and great fear fell upon them which saw them. The two witnesses were resurrected. And they heard a great voice from heaven, saying unto them, Come up hither. And they ascended up to heaven in a cloud, and their enemies beheld them. So the two witnesses are resurrected, and then they are raptured. I'll let you look at that. Any question? No. Good. That's a good thing to look at. I mean, 3.5 days to 3 days. I don't know where the 3.5 days comes from. Honestly, I can't think of anything that it really relates to. 3 days is easy, right? We could pin that on a bunch of things. And you got to remember, when we say rapture, people often think of a single event, right? The rapture, the one that we're all waiting for. But we got to remember, the word rapture comes from the Greek word harpazo, which is to snatch up quickly and by force to take away. So remember, when we went over the rapture, there were several occasions of a rapture throughout the Bible. We're actually going to see another one in a little while where all of the tribulation saints at the end are all taken away at once. So, that's the rapture we're talking about. It's just the action of what's happening to them. Oh, okay. Yep. Yeah, nope, I don't know what we can compare that 3.5 days to. Boy, if they just knocked off half a day, it would make so much sense, right? Yeah, Jesus died and he rose 3 days later. That'd be easy, but yeah, I don't know why that extra half day is there. Maybe Jesus did it in 3 days because he was God. These guys needed an extra half day. I don't know. Does that sound good? Okay, let's see where we are. Okay, so next in this chapter, in verse 13, there is a great earthquake. This is earthquake number 3 in the book of Revelation. And it says that 1/10 of Jerusalem falls. So a decent amount of the city is destroyed. It also says that 7,000 men die from this earthquake and the destruction of part of Jerusalem. And it seems that as a result, who is left in the city, they seem to worship God as a result of the two witnesses and the earthquake. And then verse 14 tells us that this is the end of the second woe. So if you remember from last week, the 7 trumpet judgments, the first 4 judgments were broken down into thirds. So the first judgment destroyed, say, a third of the trees, or a third of the ocean, or a third of the rivers, or a third of whatever. Those first 4 affected a third of something. The last 3, the angel says, are woes. This means they are terrible. They are more severe. Sorry, folks. So we just finished the second woe. Verses 15 to 19 is trumpet judgment number 7. And these verses look forward to Revelation chapters 15, verse 5 to 16, verse 1, when the 7 vials of wrath are poured out. Okay, so here is the outline for the judgment of God during the 70th week of Daniel. And we are now at this point where the 7th trumpet judgment is poured out, and that is going to take place in the form of 7 vials of wrath that are poured out. But before we get there, we still have a few more chapters in this parenthetical insert that we have to go over. So moving on to Revelation chapter 12. Revelation chapter 12 talks about a woman. The woman is pregnant. The woman is not the church. The church is always described as a virgin bride. Now, there are 4 women described in the entire book of Revelation. 2 of them are good, 2 of them are bad. First, you have Jezebel in Revelation 2. She's bad. Then you have the harlot in Revelation 17 and 18, also bad. You have the pregnant woman in Revelation chapter 12, and you have the bride of Christ, and we all know who she is. This woman in chapter 12 is Israel, and she is described as a woman going through great travail. That phrase, or I should say, Israel is compared to a pregnant woman in great travail many, many times in the Old Testament. It is obvious that this woman is Israel because she gives birth, and who is the child? The child is, who said it? Good job. The child is Jesus. The child is Messiah. Verses 7 through 11 is a flashback describing when Satan rebelled and consequently was cast down to the earth. I was going to skip this section, but one of you asked me to cover it, so here we go. Don't say I never gave you anything. We're going to go over Satan and a bunch of information on him. There's a lot of verses here. So Revelation chapter 12, verses 7 through 10. And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels, and prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven. There are several facts that we must notice. I'm going to go back to verse 7 to point some of these out. So number 1, there was a war. The war was in heaven. It was not in earth. Number 2, it says Michael has angels. Michael and his angels, that's a possessive pronoun. We know Michael didn't create these angels. We don't believe he owns them. I don't think he purchased them somewhere. Okay, but these are his angels. Michael, the archangel, is in charge of 1/3 of all the angels in the world. We know that the devil is in charge of 1/3 of all the angels in the world. And I believe Gabriel is in charge of 1/3 of all the angels in the world as well. In verse 9, and the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. The devil lost the war. War in heaven, Devil and his angels lost. He was cast down to earth, and his angels were cast down to earth with him. Any questions so far? We're still going to talk more about the devil. Any questions? You got one? Very good. That is his proper name, Lucifer. Lucifer, the name of the devil, appears one place in the entire Bible for 10 points. Can any kid tell me where it is? You think you know? Nope. Nope. It's a book in the Bible. It's okay. Yep. Yeah, you have the odds are 1 out of 66 you'll get it right. Okay, so the questions we want to answer are these. Where did Satan come from? When was the war in heaven? And when was he cast out of heaven? Because we're reading about this war in heaven in the very last book of the Bible. He was not cast out, in the future when the book of Revelation is going on. So let's take a brief look at our enemy before we move on. We'll answer these questions. Okay, Satan. Number one, God calls Satan an anointed cherub. And he says that Satan was in the Garden of Eden. You can read about that in Ezekiel 28. When Satan was in the Garden of Eden, God talks about him as if he was someone in a position of authority. Satan is a creation by God. Now that should go without saying, but there you go, I'm saying it. We read about this in Genesis chapter 2, verses 1 and 2. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day God ended his work which he had made, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made. God created everything in 6 days. That includes all the angels, the cherubim, the seraphim, all the earthly animals, all the celestial beings, all locations, all planets and stars. Everything was created by God in 6 days, and that was it. That includes Satan, whose proper name is Lucifer. You see, on day number 7, God did not just rest. It says he ended his work. God was done creating things on day number 7. It's not like several months or years later God said, you know what, there are a few things I forgot. Let's go out to the workshop and whip up a few more things. No, God created it all in 6 days. That was it. Everything God created was made in those 6 days. We also know that upon his creation, Satan was good. Genesis 1:31. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And the evening and the morning were the 6th day. At the end of the creation week, God looks at everything he had made and says, that is very good. Satan did not fall. There was no rebellion. There was no war in heaven. It was sometime after day number 7 that Satan rebelled. And I'm going to give you this, and I'm not going to tell you how I came to this number, but I'll be happy to explain it later. Adam and Eve could have been living in the garden with God without any sin for up to 110 years prior to the serpent showing up in the garden and them taking of the fruit and sin coming into the world. 110 years. I'll let you do the math. I'll show you the formula when we're done, but it's very simple. When I explain it, you're not going to be impressed. Okay, number 3, Satan wanted to be God. You can read about that in Isaiah chapter 14. By the way, kids, Isaiah chapter 14 is the one place in the entire Bible where we read Satan's proper name of Lucifer. It'll be a question on Jeopardy one day, so write that down. There was war in heaven. When Satan and 1/3 of the angels fought against the remaining 2/3 of the angels, they lost, and Satan was cast out of heaven and down to earth. And finally, the devil will be cast into the lake of fire, and you can read about that in Revelation 20. You kids hear that? Where's the devil going to be cast in the end? Lake of fire. Very good. After Satan was cast down to the earth, he went to the Garden of Eden and tempted Adam and Eve, and the story picks up in Genesis chapter 3. So that means that the war in heaven happened after creation on day number 8 and before Genesis chapter 3. We don't know how much time is in there. We read the story and we think, oh, days 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Well, the next verse must be day 8. No, we know when we read through the Bible that we're reading along and all of a sudden it skipped decades, a generation, days, weeks, months. Okay, and unfortunately the Bible doesn't give us a timeline as it goes. The timeline's in there, but it's hidden, and you got to figure it out, and you got to do the math, but it is in there. All right, let's see where we're at. That's time for more questions. Anyone got any questions? Yes, sir. The only Ring of Fire I'm familiar with is in that Johnny Cash song. But I don't know of any Ring of Fire in the Bible. Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't know anything about that. Yep, I'd have to do some research. I thought you were going to break out Dante's Inferno. Okay, let's see. Any other questions? I'm moving along. All right. Yes, sir. Revelation was written, we believe, 95, 96 AD. And we believe John, the Apostle John, was 100 years old or very close to it when he wrote it. Yep, it was one of the last books of the Bible written, one of the last books of the New Testament that was written. Yep. Okay, in the 70th week of Daniel, the devil attacks Israel by means of the Antichrist. Israel is driven into the wilderness to survive. That is talked about in verse 6 and in verses 14 through 16 of chapter 12. Satan continues to attack the nation of Israel from the Garden of Eden all the way up through to the book of Revelation. That is his goal. His goal is the destruction of the nation of Israel. Don't get me wrong, his goal is the destruction of the Christian as well, but we're not here at this point as we're going through the 70th week of Daniel. Israel escapes into the wilderness by the way of an eagle in verse 14. And Israel finds shelter from the attacks of the Antichrist through Edom, Moab, and Ammon. And this is described in Daniel chapter 11, verse 41. Now, I'm just giving you this and we're moving on. We don't have time to hit all of this. We'll never get out of here. Verse 15, the Antichrist pursues Israel and she is supernaturally protected. And we see that in verse 16 of Revelation chapter 12. This brings us to chapter 13. Chapter 13 has a lot of action, and everyone wants to hear about this one because the characters in this one are the Antichrist and the false prophet. In chapter 12, we read that the red dragon is Satan. Here in chapter 13, we read about the beast of the sea, and who he is the Antichrist. And then later we read about the beast of the earth, who is the false prophet. So as far as the Antichrist goes, Satan and the power of Satan is the reason that the Antichrist comes to power and gets his position and authority. In verse 4, we read about the one world religion. The Bible does talk about a one-world religion in the end times in the 70th week of Daniel. We read about that in Revelation 13, verse 4. It says, "And they worshipped the dragon which gave power unto the beast. And they worshipped the beast, saying, Who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him?" So the people of the earth worship Satan and the Antichrist. Verse 7 says they are from every kindred, tongue, and nation. And verse 8 says that the group was made up of all those on the earth whose name is not written in the book of life. This is why we believe it is a one-world religion, because it's made up of everyone that is not saved on the earth, all nations, every kindred tongue. The Antichrist rules for 3.5 years. My belief is that the Antichrist rules for the first 3.5 years. At the midpoint of the 7 years, everything changes. The nation of Israel no longer wants to follow the Antichrist because they are too busy running for their lives to escape the Antichrist. Verses 7 and 8 tells us that the Antichrist makes war with the saints. Well, let's get there. What that means is that people must be getting saved during the 70th week of Daniel. There has to be someone there for him to make war with. That also means that those who are getting saved are running and hiding for their lives. In the end, the saints are overcome. They do not survive the 7 years. In verse number 11, beast number 2 shows up, the beast of the sea, and this fella is the false prophet. Satan, the Antichrist, and the false prophet make up the unholy Trinity, just like we have the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. Satan is the deceiver. He's the counterfeit. In verse 13, the false prophet performs miracles. Now let's take a look at this. Revelation 13, verse 14. And we'll pick it up with the second half of verse 14. Or no, wait, I'm sorry. No, I'm in the right spot. Okay, this is just the first half of verse 14. Revelation 13, verse 14. "And deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast." Do you know that we are not supposed to choose who to follow and who to worship based on miracles? The Catholics for centuries have been deceiving people because of miracles. Satan has power and can perform miracles. Therefore, miracles alone should not impress any of us. Do you know that many false religions have people in leadership that can perform supernatural miracles? That's been going on for centuries. Here in verse 14, we are told that many people are led astray because of the miracles. Do not follow after miracles. What does Jesus say about people who seek after miracles? In Matthew chapter 12, verse 39, "But he answered and said unto them, An evil and adulterous generation seeketh after a sign. And there shall no sign be given to it, but the sign of the prophet Jonah." We are supposed to be impressed with the Word of God. We are supposed to follow those who fear the Word of God and who bring honor to the Word of God. We're not supposed to seek after miracles. You know what a person wants after they see a miracle? Another miracle. We read about that in the Gospels. The Pharisees just saw Jesus perform a whole bunch of miracles. Turns the corner, they're like, "We want one. We want another one." And we want it to be specific. We want it to be the way that we say it should be done. And we want it right now. Yes, sir. Oh, yeah. So the Pentecostal movement is seeking after a sign. It's emotionalism. We get excited about something that we see. We feel like we see the working of God, so therefore it must be legitimate. Doesn't matter if it contradicts the Bible from start to finish. That's how people get led astray. Verse 15. All right, now this one is out there. An image of the Antichrist is erected. It is believed by many that this statue is stood up in the Holy of Holies. And this is talking about the midpoint of the 70th week of Daniel and the abomination of desolation. Revelation 13, verses 14 and 15. Saying to them that dwell on the earth, that they should make an image to the beast, which had the wound by a sword, and did live. And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. In the last year, I have come to believe that Revelation 13:15 is a technology statement. I believe this verse could very well be talking about AI and robotics. The image of the beast, that's essentially a statue, right? We all agree? Images, they're idols, they're statues. That's what they set up. This statue comes to life. Am I wrong in reading that? No, that's what it says. Doesn't just move around, it talks. Yes, ma'am.
But it says which had the wound by a sword, so how is that?
No. So the Antichrist has a wound by the sword. Earlier on, you read about how he was wounded unto death but came back to life, and that was kind of the big introduction to the Antichrist in verse 13. So what we find is that wound is emblematic of the Antichrist. It is actually a mark on him that people take on, which we are going to get to later. So the statue, they gave a mark to make sure that it was clearly this guy. Yep. So the image of the beast, the statue comes to life. Y'all with me so far? Okay. Now, we must notice that this image compels people to worship the Antichrist. The image compels people to do this. Not the beast of the sea, not the beast of the earth, not Satan. It says the image compels people to worship the Antichrist. This image makes a decision resulting in everyone being killed who is not on board with Antichrist worship. That sounds like the singularity. That sounds like AI making a decision independently of its creators, without the help of Satan, without the help of the Antichrist. Read that verse and tell me it's talking about something else. Now, I'm not asking you to believe this or go home and tell your friends this. I'm just saying that's what it says. The image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not be worshipped, that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. It's the image of the beast that causes that to happen. And if I'm wrong, that's fine, but that's still weird. That is not normal. You can see why they worship this guy. Statue comes to life, starts talking, making policy. All right. Well, I was impressed by it. I don't care. Okay, verses 16 to 18 is the mark of the beast. Oh boy. So people have made such a mess out of these next three verses. You will meet people who are scared to get a Social Security card or a credit card with a chip in it or use anything with a barcode or get an RFID chip. We do not need to worry about the mark of the beast for several reasons. Number one, this number, it's a mark and it's a number. This number is his number. Do you understand? It is the number of the Antichrist. It is not an identification number for you. It's his number. It's his number and it's his mark. Number two, you cannot accidentally take this mark. You are willingly taking on his number and his mark as a sign of allegiance to him. When you take the mark, you are obeying the Antichrist and aligning yourself with him. Can you accidentally worship Jesus and get saved? No. In the same way, you didn't accidentally get married. Like, yeah, I just stumbled in here and, I left with a wife. Okay, that's not how it works. When we get saved, we know when it happens. It's a big event. It's the same way when you reject Jesus and decide to take on this mark of the beast because you're worshiping and following the Antichrist. This is nothing that we have, oh boy, I don't know. I don't know if I like this. That kind of seems like the mark of the beast. No. Friends, where are we when all this happens? Yeah, we will be gone, taken away in the rapture. And the purpose of this mark is to eliminate the nation of Israel and the tribulation saints. At this point, remember, I'm not going to find the timeline. In the first 3.5 years, there is general world peace. The nation of Israel is excited to follow the Antichrist. They believe, who do they believe he is? Messiah. And then all of a sudden, at the midpoint, he breaks his own covenant, goes into the temple, goes into the Holy of Holies, stops the sacrifices, erects a statue of himself, and declares that he is God and everyone must worship. Well, in a real hurry, the nation of Israel says, we made a mistake. That's not the guy. And we're going to read in the second half of Matthew chapter 24 that when Jesus explains to the Jews, when you see the abomination of desolation happen, what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to run. He says, do not turn off your stove in the kitchen. Just run. Grab the kids. Don't pack a bag. Just run. Your mother-in-law's old. She can't get around that fast anymore. Just run. I'm just joking. I know mother-in-law jokes are cheap and easy. I'm just joking. Joanna has a great mother-in-law. All right. Any questions? Yes. Are the what? Not that I know of. I don't believe so. Yep. 3 6s is the only number that we read about. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. I mean, go to Revelation chapter 13. And in verse 18, here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, one guy, and his number is 666. It means something. No, I definitely do not know. Yeah, so here's the thing you got to remember about prophecy. And this is a very broad question, so bear with me. What is the purpose of prophecy? Okay, how about this? We all remember, oh boy, I think it was back in the 80s, Back to the Future, right? Marty McFly? Okay. We would all love to get a DeLorean and get 1.21 gigawatts and go 82 miles an hour and go back in time or into the future. Because if you could go into the future, you could see what's going to happen, and then you go back to your own time and you could make changes, right? That's the whole idea. That's why time traveling movies are fun, or at least for me they were. I'm a sci-fi geek. Okay, but that's the idea with, if you could know what's going to happen in the future, then you could make changes in your life. But that's not the purpose of prophecy. The purpose of prophecy in the Bible is an authentication device. The purpose of prophecy, Peter says this in one of his letters. He says, "We that saw the miracles of Jesus have a more sure word of prophecy." He said the prophets predicting and then having them fulfilled by Jesus is a bigger miracle than Jesus walking on water and raising the dead, because it shows that a supernatural force outside of time had to write this book. But when the prophets speak, nobody is able to use what they hear from the prophets in a futuristic prediction and then make arrangements for it. Let me give you a quick story, because we're off in the weeds, and this is a cool story, and we're almost done. So there's a point, I believe the king's name was, oh boy, now I'm probably going to mess this up real bad. Okay, but I believe the king's name was Zechariah. I'm not going to find it fast enough, and I'm not going to make you sit here and listen. Okay, but what ended up happening to this king was that two prophecies came up. Jeremiah and Ezekiel both came up with a prophecy. Jeremiah was the older prophet who was better known, and he was in Jerusalem while the Babylonians were laying siege, and Ezekiel was off in Babylon. He'd already been taken away. And Ezekiel came up with this prophecy that the king would never see Babylon. And Jeremiah, a contemporary, they were alive at the same time, came up with the prophecy and said, this king will die in Babylon. So all of a sudden, everyone's up in arms, and they're like, well, obviously, one of you guys has got this messed up. And they thought that the younger, less experienced prophet obviously didn't know what he was talking about, until the Babylonians broke down the walls and came in and captured the king. And what they did to the king was they brought all of his sons in front of him, and they killed each one of his sons in front of him, and they made him watch. And then they put out his eyes, so it would be the last thing he ever remembered. And then they marched him off to Babylon, where he died of old age many, many years later. He did not see Babylon. And Jeremiah was also right. He died there. Nobody could see how that worked out. They just heard conflicting prophecies, and they said, one of you guys is wrong. One of you guys is a false prophet. Nope, they were both true prophets of God. They couldn't make it work. And then when they saw it play out, they're like, oh, you didn't see. Okay, let's continue. So yeah, the 666 doesn't help me a bit. I don't think it helps anyone. Noah. Okay, so I would argue that what was brought up is the Tetragrammaton, and the idea that in Greek and in Hebrew, words, symbols, characters have numeric values. So Hebrew characters, different words have different numeric values. The problem is this: when you get into numerology and trying to make the number say something, it gets into a software quip, which is, if you torture the data long enough, it'll confess to anything. Okay, so if you play around with the numbers long enough, we can get the numbers to say that, this king or that president or whoever, you know what I mean? And books have been written on all of it. So that's why I don't put too much stock in some of the numerology trying to figure things out. Using numerology and looking back, it's amazing what we can prove happened. But anyway, let's keep going. Okay, chapter 15. Now we're going to skip ahead to chapter 15 and continue with the final 7 plagues. We're going to call these judgments the 7 vials of wrath. In verse 5 of chapter 15, it says, the temple in heaven was opened and some angels came out. Now, a lot of people don't understand that what Moses built in the wilderness and what King Solomon built in Jerusalem are simply a replica of the temple that exists in heaven today. And the Bible talks about the temple in heaven quite a bit. Several times it's mentioned in Revelation. 7 vials of judgment in chapter 16. Number 1, there was a noisome and grievous sore upon the men which had the mark of the beast. So what does that imply? Well, if the sore was upon the men which had the mark of the beast, then that means there were other men without the mark of the beast that the sword did not affect. It would seem that the tribulation saints were not affected. The Bible does not give the result of this plague. Several times it tells us what happened and then what the result is. Plague number 1 is not the case. Number 2, vial number 2, the entire sea became blood. Find that in verse 3. And it says, every living soul died in the sea. Now, I could only imagine the effect this had on the world, the ecological disaster that this would be. But it gets worse. 3rd angel pours out a vial. All the rivers and fountains of water become blood in verse 4. If all the rivers and fountains and all the seas are blood, that doesn't leave much water left. Do we agree? I believe this is right up at the end of this 7-year period because the people are literally without water. Now, I don't even have time to go into this, but do you understand the implication of drinking blood? Not only is it wildly unhealthy for you to the point of death, but think of who the wrath of God is being poured out on. Who's getting it? Who's the target of the wrath of God on the 70th week of Daniel? Nope. Israel. It's the nation of Israel. They are being punished for their rejection of Messiah 2,000 years ago. So now when we think of it that way, how does this blood change that a little bit? Yeah, in the Exodus story, right? Okay, the water became blood. But what does that mean if you're living on earth and the only water is blood and you're Jewish? Yes, you are not allowed to eat the blood. Your animals had to be killed a certain way and bled out. You're not allowed to eat the blood. That's again and again and again in the Bible. Blood is for one purpose, to be poured out on the altar. That's another study. I don't even have time to get into it. I just want to throw that out there so you guys can see. I got another one in the end here that I think is really neat. Okay, where were we? I don't remember. Number 3. Vial number 4, the 4th angel had power to scorch men with fire from the sun. Find that in verse 8. This vial was poured out on the sun. The men of the earth were scorched with great heat. The Bible says that power was given to him. I have no idea who him is. I'm assuming it is the angel who poured out the 4th vial onto the sun mentioned in verse 8. I'm assuming that angel had the power to scorch the men of the earth. And the men of the earth blasphemed the name of God. What does that imply? They knew who the wrath was coming from, and they still repented not. Vial number 5. The kingdom of the Antichrist was filled with darkness in verse 10. Now this is weird. It says, those in that kingdom gnawed their tongues for pain. And in verse 10 it says that the vial was poured out upon the seat of the beast. This suggests that he has a headquarters with a throne of some kind. It also says his kingdom was the one filled with darkness. Does that mean there are geographical boundaries to his kingdom? If so, that would make sense, because the nation of Israel and the tribulation saints are seeking refuge outside of those borders, trying to survive. And it says that his kingdom was filled with darkness. That implies other areas on earth were not. And again, they blasphemed God, and again, they repented not. Vial number 6, the Euphrates River dries up. There are 3 verses in verses 13, 4 verses in verses 13, 14, 15, and 16 after the 6th vial is poured out. And I don't know if it is related to the 6th vial or not, but I'll tell you what it says. 3 spirits like frogs come up out of the mouth of Satan, the Antichrist, and the false prophet. They go and recruit the kings of the earth to battle with God. They gather in Armageddon, and that is similar to what happens at the end of the 1,000-year millennial reign of Christ. Okay, finally, 7th vial. We're almost done. 7th vial is poured out into the air. Next came a great voice from the temple in heaven saying, "It is done." Now, I don't have time to get into that, but what does that sound like? What does that make you think of? Yes, Jesus on the cross. It is finished. Do you know that God is saying there that the penalty for the nation of Israel for the rejection of Messiah is complete? There will be no more. Now, there are ramifications for the 7th vial. There were voices, thunders, lightnings, and the greatest earthquake in earth's history. That's what it says. Jerusalem was divided into 3 parts. The cities of the Gentiles fell. Was the earthquake so massive that all the cities of all the Gentiles all around the world became rubble? It gets worse. Every island fled away. If this was the largest earthquake in the history of the world, and it was worldwide, that means near every single one of those little islands, there was a tsunami. And that island was gone. This is the level of destruction we're talking about in the end. The mountains were not found. I don't know what that means, but that's a big deal. Finally, great hail out of heaven fell upon the men of the earth. When you read verse 21 and do the math, you will find that the hail, the pieces of hail coming out of the sky, weighed over 100 pounds. That's the size of the big chunks of rock and ice that are landing on everybody. Over 100 pounds. 113 pounds and 10 ounces by my math. Now, men are dying everywhere from this hail. It is crushing them to powder. And the form of execution for these men resembles what? Stoning. And stoning is the punishment throughout the Bible for blasphemy, which is what it said the men of the earth did at every turn. They blasphemed God. This concludes the wrath of God poured out during the 70th week of Daniel. Any questions? Yes, ma'am.
How would the Euphrates River dry up if it's flood? This is the waters of the Euphrates, but it's
I don't know. Short answer. Not sure. Any other questions? Yes, sir. Where? If I had to guess, Pergamos. Pergamos is in Turkey. It is in eastern Turkey. It's one of the 7 cities that Jesus wrote letters to in the first 3 chapters of the book of Revelation. And Pergamos, it literally says that's where Satan's seat is. And that was the city where they had emperor worship, where everyone in the Roman Empire had to go to Pergamos, and they had to go to the temple of emperor worship, the Roman empires, and they had to take a little pinch of incense and throw it in the fire and show that they worshiped the emperor as a god. And then they were recorded, and now you're free to go, and we'll see you back next year. We just want to make sure that everyone's okay worshiping the emperor as a god. Do you know there were 2 groups that weren't okay with that? Jews and the Christians. They wouldn't do it. Yep. Okay. The result. There are 2 major results of the second half of the 70th week of Daniel. We must remember that the time period is called the time of Jacob's trouble. This time in the wrath of God is punishment on the nation of Israel for rejecting Messiah 2,000 years ago. So the first result is the death toll, the number of people who die. I don't know the number of human beings that die during the 70th week of Daniel, but I do know how many Jews die. In Zechariah 13, verses 8 and 9, and it shall come to pass that in all the land, saith the Lord, 2 parts therein shall be cut off and die, but the third shall be left therein. And I will bring the third part through the fire, and will refine them as silver is refined, and will try them as gold is tried. They shall call on my name, and I will hear them. I will say, it is my people, and they shall say, the Lord is my God. 2/3 of all the Jews died during this 3.5-year period. Worldwide, during the Holocaust, 1/3 of all the Jews on earth died. During the 70th week of Daniel, 2/3 die. The second thing that happens as a result of the time of Jacob's trouble is the reaction of those Jews who survive. We read in Zechariah 13, verse 9, that the 1/3 of the nation of Israel that goes through the fire, they call on the name of the Lord. We also read about this in Hosea chapter 5, verse 15. I will go and return to my place till they acknowledge their offense and seek my face. In their affliction they will seek me early. God goes back to his place. Well, to go back somewhere, you must have first left it. That's what Jesus did when he came down to earth in the form of a man, born as a little baby. He left his place in heaven, and then, after his death, burial, and resurrection, he went back there. And he said, I will return. I'm coming back. He is not coming back until they acknowledge their offense and seek his face. What will be going on when they seek him? They will be going through affliction. That is the time of Jacob's trouble. At the end of the 70th week of Daniel, all of Israel is saved. That's it for the night. Any questions? You guys did great. Come on, we went over so much information. Or you guys are just tired and you want to go home. Yes, ma'am. Soon? Yeah, so the question is, what I say is that the nation of Israel has the wrath of God poured out on them for rejecting Messiah 2,000 years ago. So 2,000 years from today. When is that going to take place? We don't know. But the nation of Israel, so here, you ready for this, guys? This should keep you up at night and scare you. God judges nations. And because there can be no judgment of a nation in an afterlife, the judgment of a nation must fall on that nation in this life. And the problem is, God says, don't do this, don't do this, don't do that. And the nation disobeys God and acts wickedly. At some point, God says, okay, I've had enough. Here comes the penalty. The crazy thing is, the people that were acting wickedly, they're already dead and gone. Generations have passed, but now God needs to mete out that disobedience with judgment. The nation of Israel corporately rejected Messiah in Matthew chapters 10, 11, and 12. And then they rejected him again when he rode in on the donkey to Jerusalem. And then they rejected him for the final time in the court of Pontius Pilate when they said, crucify him, let his blood be upon us and upon our children. So that's when the nation of Israel said, nope, we want nothing to do with Jesus. He is not God. He is not Messiah. Crucify him. And it is now when the nation of Israel is going to get the punishment for that time. So, we don't know when, obviously, the 70th week of Daniel is coming. We're closer to it today than we were yesterday, but how much so, I don't know. But that's what I'm referring to when I say when they rejected him, 2,000 years ago from today. Yeah. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The scripture. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They haven't gotten better. Yeah. Yes. Unfortunately, most of Israel is no closer to seeking Messiah and believing in Jesus. Yep. Yeah. The nation of Israel is not a super godly place. There are areas of it, with a lot of Christians. There's areas of it with, with Jews who take their religion seriously. But the majority of it is wildly secular. To call Israel a godly place or a holy land is like calling America a Christian nation. And I know I say that a lot, and I know that makes someone mad. I don't know who. I'm sure it makes somebody mad. But America is not a Christian nation. We're not even close. We are the exporter. We are the producer and the exporter of all of the sins that God hates the most. That's what we do. Okay? Our number one export is abortions. Right behind that is pornography. That's what America's famous for. That's what we produce and export all around the world. We are not a Christian nation. This is not what a Christian nation looks like. I don't doubt we might have been one at one point. I don't know. Wasn't when I was alive. So unfortunately, that's the case. Here's the deal. I ask people this all the time. Gage and I were just talking about this last week. Think of the last time. So do you know the percentage of people in America that say they're Christian? that say they are. I'm not saying they go to church. I'm definitely not saying they could tell you what the gospel is. I'm just saying they say they're Christian. You know the percentages of Americans that say they're Christian? Yeah. Okay, between 60 and 80, depending on the poll. Okay? So 6 to 8 out of 10 people that you see every day say they're Christian. Think of the last time you went out to eat. What percentage of people do you see pray before they eat a meal? Here's my point, folks. If you wanted to pretend to be a Christian, if you're not a Christian and you're trying to pretend to be one, it doesn't get any easier than closing your eyes and bowing your head for 5 seconds before you eat. They're not even doing that. Don't tell me 60 to 80% of people in America are saved and going to heaven when they die. That is nonsense. I rest my case. All right, let's have a word of prayer. We'll get out of here. We'll end on a high note. And be sure to get you some brownies and a donut before you go. I appreciate you all. Thank you for showing up. We are going to be in this end times study for no more than 2 weeks. Next week, we're going to do the 1,000-year millennial reign and the Davidic covenant. And then we're going to get back into the book of Matthew, chapter 24. And we're going to be back into our study of the book of Matthew. And then away we go. So just so you know, there is an end to this thing. I know we went long on this end time study. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. I figured if we're going to do it, we might as well get into it, you know, and go over a lot of information. Sometimes I wonder if we went too deep, but I appreciate you sticking with me through all of it. James, would you be so kind as to close us in a word of prayer?